me mamo moo. Sorry. Good morning, everyone. We are rolling in here in Austin, and it's so great to have humans right here in the Harry Ransom Center, and hopefully humans joining us on HowlRound Online. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Wilbur. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an associate professor in dance and theater studies at Duke University, and I write about how money motivates movement in the arts. I'm so happy to be here as one of the co-conveners of the Building Equitable Arts Infrastructures Symposium. This is day 2. And we also have an allied research group. Some of our research group members are facilitators for the events today. Oh, yeah.
And I'm Paul Bonin-Rodriguez. I'm from the University of Michigan, the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, and the Excellence in Entrepreneurship and Leadership Lab. And formerly here from the University of Texas at Austin. Now, yesterday we had a wonderful day of contributors speaking how narratives, practices, programs, and policies can shape more equitable support systems for art and artists.
So today we're going to open the session with a keynote conversation, and after our lunch break, we will have afternoon sessions that are centered on topics like labor and work, and market and audiences.
At the end of today, our research group will take the stage together and open the floor for a final conversation with attendees here in Austin and online. Throughout the day, we want to encourage those tuning in on HowlRound to contribute questions and comments via the link.
And for those of us here in Austin, we have these QR codes, and if you'd like to write a question, you can go ahead and take a snapshot of those, or just show up for the final session. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Canning.
Thank you. I'm Charlotte Canning. I'm professor in the Department of Theater Dance and secretary of the general faculty here at UT. I get one of the best assignments of the day, which is to introduce the person who is welcoming us this morning and welcoming us to his home, the Ransom Center. So it's a really great honor for me to introduce you to Stephen Enniss, who is the director of the Harry Ransom Center right here at UT Austin. He is, and this is so perfect for today, he is enjoying this extraordinarily rare moment for any archivist or librarian where I can genuinely say he needs no introduction. Why do I get to say that? Because last month his name was in every national media news outlet because the Ransom Center got a donation of Lorne Michaels of SNL, Saturday Night Live's archive that will now be housed here. Now, part I think that those of us in Texas did not enjoy was the note of surprise that all of the news outlets recorded. One noted, although way off Broadway and far from the show's New York roots, the Ransom Center is one of the top literary and humanities archives and research institutions in the country. You hear the skepticism, right? Well, the Ransom Center is a globally recognized library and archive that has thrived and flourished under Director Enniss's leadership. He has brought scores of new archives to the University of Texas, including that of 2 Nobel laureates, Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Kazu Ishiguro. He has held previous appointments at the Folger Shakespeare Library and at Emory's University Manuscript Archives and Rare Book Library. His own research interests are in 20th century poetry, and he has written on Ted Hughes, Sylvia Plath, and Seamus Heaney, among other figures. And he is the author of After the Titanic, A Life of Derek Mahon in 2014. Please join me in welcoming Stephen Enniss.
So I was delighted to be asked to speak this morning because this allows me to count this as the 5th thing I've done this week. Seriously delighted that the Arts Infrastructure Research Group is meeting here at the Harry Ransom Center. A warm welcome to members of the working group, to Congresswoman Pingree, and to campus colleagues and students. I hope you've had an opportunity yesterday, or that you will later today, to visit our galleries, where we have on view Freedom to Write, Freedom to Read, excuse me, the story of pen, which tells the 100-year struggle for freedom of expression here in the state that leads the nation in book bans. Also on view, which just opened this week, Words and Wonder, Rediscovering Children's Literature. Unlike a traditional museum, the Ransom Center's collections are all available every day in our reading room and in our classrooms on the second floor. You're meeting today in one of the most active and vibrant humanities research centers in the country. And I would like briefly to contextualize the Ransom Center's own contributions to the arts infrastructure. It's worth noting that the center had its origin in 1957, the year that the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik rocket into space. As you know, that event prompted the space race, prompted expansion of higher education in this country, massive investment in our universities, in particular in science and technology. And Harry Ransom believed quite simply that there needed to be a commensurate investment in the arts and humanities. He had started as an English professor, and he became a dean, and then he became a provost, and then he became president, and then he became chancellor, all here at the University of Texas. And as a result of his rise and influence within the university, he was able to direct, to the theme of our conference, he was able to direct significant resources to the creation of a humanities research center, essentially from scratch, starting in 1957. One of the most amusing items in our institutional archive is a memo that Harry Ransom President Harry Ransom wrote to Chancellor Harry Ransom. For a time, he was both. President Harry Ransom wrote to Chancellor Harry Ransom requesting the transfer of funds from Chancellor Harry Ransom to President Harry Ransom for the creation of a humanities research center here at the university. Needless to say, our budgeting has become more difficult in more recent times. But we are sustained today not by state resources, which have essentially remained flat, but really by private endowments and by generous supporters who believe in the mission that this institution is here to fulfill. Charlotte kindly mentioned some of the noteworthy acquisitions that have come in recent years that give you a sense of the character of this research institution. I would just add a few that might be relevant to your interest here today. The recent acquisition of the Arthur Miller papers, or just this past week, we added significantly to our Tom Stoppard holdings. The original papers came years ago, but Tom has continued to be productive, and we now have the materials related to his most recent play, Leopoldstadt. As you can tell from the figures I'm mentioning, we often collect very much at the contemporary moment, and so have an opportunity and a responsibility really to maintain and add to these archives as these creative figures continue to produce. I would also call out two other theater-related acquisitions, which relate to the point Charlotte was making about the international standing of the institution. We were delighted when two former directors of Britain's National Theatre, Richard Eyre and Michael Blakemore, both placed their archives not in British institutions, but here at the Ransom Center in Austin, Texas. And as Charlotte also mentioned, we're very active and increasingly active in the whole area of film and television. The foundation collection for those holdings really is the archive of the David O. Selznick Studio, which came many, many years ago. Among the many contributions the Selznick Studio made, among the most significant was introducing Alfred Hitchcock to American audiences with Rebecca in 1940. We did have the good fortune to acquire as well the papers of Robert De Niro, who has a close relationship with the Ransom Center. And out of appreciation for all that the center has done, De Niro recently endowed the the Robert De Niro Curator of Film position here at the Ransom Center. And most recently, as Charlotte mentioned, the Lauren Michaels collection. Since we are talking about value and yesterday about commodities and gifts, I'll emphasize Lauren Michaels' gift to the Ransom Center of the 50-year production history of Saturday Night Live. Those collections perhaps give you some sense of the character of the institution. Really, it's boundless. But I should emphasize that we are part of a larger research ecosystem. And I would cite as peers New York Public Library's Library for the Performing Arts, Harvard's Theater Collection, Yale's Beinecke, all of which strive to capture and preserve the ephemeral record of creativity and for study and appreciation by future generations of students and researchers. These institutions, the Ransom Center included, stand at a particularly peculiar place in any discussion of the value of the arts, somewhere between an arts marketplace and the academy. And we participate in that marketplace, sometimes purchasing the collections I've mentioned, but we are also strangely apart from it. And the theater and performing arts archives that make the passage from that marketplace into the Ransom Center pass into a setting where they will never again be bought or sold, becoming quite literally priceless. And we hope, with the passage of time, take on another kind of cultural value worthy of the attention and care that we bestow on them. Some of you will be familiar with John Cage's composition, ASLSP, for As Slow as Possible. For the last 24 years, this piece has been playing continuously in the ruins of a medieval church, St. Bichardi, in the German town of Haberstadt. And at the current pace, the full piece will not be finished for another 615 years, in the year 2640. This is equivalent to a continuous piece of music being played from the 14th century to the present, from the time of Geoffrey Chaucer to that of Zadie Smith. And the score on which the work is written stretches over 4 meters in length, but what gives the performance its remarkable duration is the fact that a single note may last a year or more than 20 years into the performance, and we are only on the 16th note. Recently, more than 1,000 people crowded into the ruin to hear a single note change. When there is no note change, the organ sounds a continuous tone night and day, which neighbors say sounds something like an air raid siren warning of imminent doom. I'm fond of Cage's piece in this performance because in some ways it reminds me of the equally outrageous work that our libraries and archives are engaged in. In the Ransom Center's case, it's the outrageous idea that time can be held still, that the performance will not end, and we can hold on to this ephemeral record of creative expression forever. That work is itself a statement of value that my colleagues and I are committed to, and I suspect you are too. The Harry Ransom Center is proud to be a part of the arts infrastructure you're here to discuss, and I offer ourselves as collaborators with you in sustaining a vibrant culture both today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Michael DeWatley. I'm a PhD candidate here at the University of Texas at Austin, and very proudly, I'm also a research fellow here at the Harry Ransom Center. So I'm excited to be with you today. It is my great honor to introduce U.S. Representative Chellie Pingree, 1st District of Maine. She lives on the island of North Haven in Maine, where she served on the school board and as a local tax assessor. In 1991, she ran for state senate and defeated a popular Republican. She went on to serve 4 terms. Between the Maine Senate and U.S. Congress, Representative Pingree was the national president and CEO of Common Cause, a nonpartisan citizen activist group. In 2008, Representative Pingree was elected to Congress from Maine's 1st Congressional District, the first woman elected to Congress from that district. She has served on the House Rules Committee and Armed Services Committee. She currently sits on the powerful House Appropriations Committee, is the ranking member on the Subcommittee on Interior and the Environment, the Subcommittee on Agriculture, and she also sits on the House Agriculture Committee. Representative Pingree is a fierce and dedicated champion of the arts. She advocates for federal investments in the arts and humanities in several ways. As a member of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Interior and the Environment, which oversees the funding for the NEA and the NEH, an ex officio member of the National Council on the Arts, and as co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Arts Caucus. One of her first official announcements this year was to celebrate awards of almost $300,000 for the arts in her district. As she said last month, from painting and music to theater and literature, the arts are woven into the fabric of Maine's history, culture, and economy. Grants from the National Endowment for the Arts are essential to ensuring that arts programs across the country have the resources to engage, inspire, and strengthen the communities they serve. As ranking member of the House Appropriations Subcommittee that oversees the NEA, I've seen firsthand how investments in the arts empower individuals and transform entire communities. I'm proud to support this funding, which will go a long way in advancing the missions of these deserving Maine organizations and preserving the creative spirit that defines our state, end quote. The convening that Dr. Maria Rosario Jackson and Dr. Wilbur spoke about yesterday, Healing, Bridging, Thriving, a summit on arts and culture in our communities, Representative Pingree was a key member of that discussion. It was clear to us as we worked on our symposium that we needed her as a key member of that discussion here. We are very honored to have Representative Pingree at the University of Texas for a keynote conversation with Dr. Charlotte Canning. Will you please welcome her?
Thank you for that nice introduction. Remember when we had funding for the arts?
Well, we'll talk about that. So those of you who were with us yesterday will remember Dr. Wilbur fangirling. This is my turn. So I'm just so excited to sit here and have this conversation with you. And I thought we'd start with something I'm super curious about, and you can take it as a softball or inappropriate, depending on how you want to read it. So thinking about our conversations last summer, how do you go from being a vegetable farmer to Congress and leadership in the arts? How does that work?
Well, first, thank you for having me. Thank you for hosting this convening. I've had the privilege of hearing some of the panels and meeting all of you, and I just so greatly appreciate your dedication to doing this, to bringing everyone together, and to all of you for the work that you're doing. It's an honor to be in your presence. And I'm sorry that I'm here to talk about the politics of all this and the funding of all this. But as to my own history, I used to always say, I was never somebody who expected to end up in politics. And I'm actually, while I live in Maine, I've been there for most of my life. I started out in Minnesota. Yeah, sure, you betcha, for any of you Minnesotans in the room. And kind of grew up in the anti-war movement, and then what came next was the Back to the Land movement. And I actually ended up on a tiny little island that Charlotte knows well, off the coast of Maine. I got there because I followed a boy who was also going to be a Back to the Lander, and we all had a copy of a book called Living the Good Life by Helen and Scott Nearing, which was sort of the Bible of the early 70s, late 60s, of how to live more simply on the land. So I ended up on an island that his family had some connections to. And as a little side note, in 1971, Back to the Landers weren't sort of easily accepted or popular, but somehow we made our way in this community. And when you heard about my elective history, because I had been living there, I had a vegetable farm. I was raising 3 kids, but I wanted to get involved in local politics. Our local politics is the town meeting. And I ran for tax assessor because it was the one job nobody else wanted. But maybe it showed my dedication to the process of politics. I really wanted to be on the local school board, and because I'd had somewhat of a rocky start in engaging in the community, it took me 20 years to finally make it to the local school board, which I took as somewhat of a sign of acceptance. By then I had 3 kids in the school and really wanted to be involved. Well, like a lot of small-town local school boards, and in Maine, most of our, about half of our education funding comes from the property taxes. Nobody wants to raise taxes to fund the school, even if they love their school. We have the smallest K-12 school in the state. On the island of North Haven, the community itself is just about 450 people and not even 100 kids in the whole school. I was on the school board with 4 other members of the local community, and we really didn't have enough funding that year, and of course it always gets cut to cut the music teacher or cut something related to the arts. And so I said to my other good friends on the school board, who didn't always agree on everything, what if I tried to raise a little money outside, set up a little program to do this? Would you go along with it? Nobody has to, and then we would help fund arts and music in the school, or we'd bring some visiting artists. And I just love thinking back to that moment, because Doug Stone, who you probably know, was on the school board at the time, and he said, well, I'd go along with you if you would get a driver's ed program at the school. And I was like, well, if that's the deal we're going to make here, we'll do it. Anyway, we got it set up. It was called North Haven Arts and Enrichment, and we started with some bake sales. We asked some of the summer residents if they would chip in to help us out, and over time, it became an institution in the school, and arts and music became part of what we do. And as you know, eventually, when the general store folded in the town, people decided to take that over and turn it into an arts and cultural center, which is more than that. It's where we host our daycare center. We have after-school events in there. We host community meetings. But they had a first-class theater for a tiny little town, and then we were able to have, first-class kind of plays that you can put on in a local community. And to this day, it has taught me so much about the value of arts in a community. I mean, I've heard a lot of other speakers talking about it, but the importance of going to a play, seeing your kids in a play. I was at one not too long ago, and my grandchildren were in it, and I had kind of a grumpy fisherman sitting behind me, and I remember him saying, that's my boy, which is a line from a famous movie, I think. But I was just like, and that's my kid too. It's just like, it's that moment of connection. They host an event every year where everyone who makes something, a knitter, a painter, a woodworker, exhibits all of their work. And we all go down there to a little reception and we look at each other's work. And, anyway, everyone knows. But so fast forward, because I owned a vegetable stand, I met a lot of people who came in the summer and bought things. And one day, it's another long story, so I won't go through all of that. But a summer resident ran into me one day on the mainland and said, we can't find a candidate for Knox County State Senate seat. You should run. I was on the school board. I was starting to kind of believe in the value of politics. Remember, school boards are nonpartisan, and I really had seen the importance of working together with your friends and neighbors on doing tough things, balancing budgets. And so I just got this idea in my head, maybe I'd like to do that. I wasn't even a member of a political party. I hadn't been engaged at all. I was a small farmer with 3 little kids on the school board. Anyway, I got it into my head. I ran in Knox County that year. It was 1992. That ended up being the other year of the woman, Clarence Thomas hearings. I had an anti-choice opponent. It turned out that was a really good thing, but mostly just because I knocked on hundreds of doors. I at the time ran a knitting business associated with my farm, so I met a lot of older women who would be like, I'm a knitter too. So I guess I could say I ran on the crafts movement and the small business movement. Anyway, I ended up winning in a very Republican district, 40% Republican, 40% independent, only 20% Democratic, and I won by 62% of the vote. So that was my, entrance into politics. I ended up spending 8 years in the Maine State Senate, ran for the United States Senate, lost, but luckily by 2008 I had a chance to run again and win again. So all those things are why I never expected to be in politics. I'm only qualified to be an organic farmer, but have learned a lot along the way and have managed to bring this very small town perspective on the importance of arts in rural states. And it has really helped me, I think, in some of the stuff we'll talk about later, is how do you deal with the political side of it. So enough dirt on my background.
That's terrific. I know I thought, we don't often talk about the knitters vote. So get out the knitters, maybe the key for the future. Midterms coming up, get out the knitters. So let's pick up with that, with 2008. So you arrive in Congress, but as most of us here will remember, 2008 was a pretty significant year in that it was also the year that the Great Recession began. So you show up in Washington. The Democrats had, of course, also a huge victory, which was very heartening, but it was also the start of a really terrifying moment economically for the country. So given that, how did that help shape your approach to the arts? How did you decide in the moment of national economic, global economic distress that the arts would be part of what you cared about? And how did that affect your political career?
Well, I came in with this sort of basic understanding, as I said, that arts was critical to my community. I'd learned a little bit about arts funding in Maine, and we never had enough. I will honestly say that I sort of built my foundation in Congress around agriculture. I served on the Armed Services Committee when I first got in because we have a lot of defense in our state. I've been on the Rules Committee, but agriculture is really my home, and it's a great place to bond with other people from rural areas. So again, I think of my approach often as how you fund the arts is making sure people understand the important role that plays in their own communities. The local historical society for the humanities, the local community theater, visiting artists in the kids' school, just arts and music programs. So I think that in coming through my early years in Congress, it helped me a lot to have this approach that was always about what's life like in a rural community and what are the difficulties of funding what are also kind of an underserved community. I didn't join, I joined the Arts Caucus right away, but I didn't become the co-chair, and I didn't take on this role in appropriations until later on. So it wasn't sort of my responsibility. I was just part of the supporting cast to Louise Slaughter, who was the chair of the Arts Caucus at that time. But I immediately said, this is part of how we have to bring in our colleagues around this, because arts funding isn't top of mind. It's often under the attack. I'm telling people things they already know. But almost everybody has some little place in their heart for it. You just have to find it.
That's terrific. I dug out a quotation that made me laugh, and I shared it with Representative Pingree, that Governor Rockefeller, this is back in 1964, at the opening of Lincoln Center in New York, at the opening performance, he asked all the legislators in the audience to stand, and he asked everyone else to give them a round of applause, because he said, it takes courage to vote for culture when you're in public life. So it's not a new phenomenon by any means. So I want to shift a little bit to how you make arguments for the arts. So, of course, conservative arguments against government funding, government arts funding, include that they should save the government money, that artists would be liberated from government control, that arts is already fairly well subsidized in other ways, or that the art that is funded is elitist or obscure or hostile to traditional values, fill in the blank, or that art often favors a specific political point of view. So how do you address those concerns when you're confronted them? And then also, if you could just talk a little bit about what's different about supporting the arts now than it was in 2016 during the first Trump administration. Also, I just have an image that I want to share, just in case you thought the hostility or suspicion of the arts was a fairly new thing. We have a telegram. It's the image number 7, Michael, if that was sent to President Johnson before the NEA was signed, and this is held here in the collection at the Lyndon Baines Johnson Presidential Library, which is here on campus, is very dark. Oh, there it. Oh no, that's the Asher letter. I want the telegram. No, although that one isn't. No, keep going. They're great, but keep going. No, keep going. There it is. So if you look at the date, really the NEA and the NEH have not even been signed yet. The bill is signed at the end of September, and already people were very worried about funding the arts when there were sort of more important things to fund. And hopefully all of us in the audience can equally divide ourselves between the long hairs and the twinkle toes. But I just wanted to give you an example of how long-standing some of these objections are, that we're not dealing with new arguments against the arts or different ideas, but these things that keep reoccurring over and over and over again. I'm sure you've gotten your share of these kind of...
Who is this from and to the president?
It was to the president. We don't know who it's from.
I see. Yeah.
But it was to the president. Interestingly, even though the LBJ Library is obviously the official record of the Johnson administration, and it's run by the NARA, which is a fabulous arm of the government, some of the record keeping is a little odd, so we don't always know who they're from. This was literally in a folder with just letter after letter that was just sort of like things people sent the president about the arts.
Wow. What a great folder to read.
Yeah, it was.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, the argument hasn't changed. You could hear that in any moment in time. You know, we've got a budget deficit. We've got any number of crises going on. Why spend money on the arts? Well, it's a huge question to unpack. So sort of where do we start? I think that we're in a unique time where the argument is somewhat different than we've had to deal with before. As I said, in my time and looking back at other eras, it's often about why would you spend this money when you could spend it on other things? Aren't there other people? What about private foundations and individuals? Can't they give you the money? So really the argument for public spending on the arts historically, and I think with the most integrity, has to go back to this question of who doesn't get funded when you have to write a grant or you have to have donors in your area who are willing to give to that, and how do you get to those places? So just to talk a little bit about that, I mean, the most effective means that we've always used is the economic argument, and organizations like Americans for the Arts and others, and state-based organizations have done a lot of, cost-benefit analysis. You can argue what's in the cost-benefit analysis, but for every state and every community, often broken down by every district that we've been able to share with members, which is a way to say, look at your district. Do you even know how many employees are directly or in some related way working for the arts? Do you know what the economic advantages are of doing it, in a state like Maine where we depend on tourists, what percentage of them come in saying, I want to see the arts and culture, your museums, your painters, your theater, your dance performances, music, whatever it is, and how does that contribute to overall economic vitality? The other is the sort of underserved argument, who doesn't get it? And you've already talked so much about this, but who doesn't get the opportunity to participate, to be a performer, to grow up with an arts education background, or to view the arts, to have the cultural experience of coming together over the arts? So sometimes that won't happen without government funding. So you go through all the, tiny little grants that are made, or the organizations that wouldn't survive. So those have been our most important and salient arguments in finding, to win a battle on these things. Usually there are Hill visits put on by state arts-based agencies or organizations who come in and talk to their member of Congress and say, we really need you to keep this funding there or increase this funding because look what we've done for it. Look what we're doing with it. Look at the arts education or arts funding that's been able to be done. So I think those will always be our fundamental best arguments. I mean, I have to talk extensively about the most bizarre era that we're in and the ideological problems that we're dealing with. But I just want to say, you know, we'll always go back to that. And that has to be everyone's sort of basic foundational argument, I think. We've been through other periods. You know, you can go back and read about the 90s and the Mapplethorpe when there was an assault on the art, and it was somewhat of an ideological, it was where we got the decency clause. It was this sort of, when does art go too far, and does it, you know, does it go beyond public standards? And so there was a battle around that, and we came back from it. And in many ways, that didn't hurt the funding as much as it put a little bit of language in what's decency, which is a whole nother complicated conversation, which on the other hand is so simple. I wish that's all we were dealing with today. Okay, so I think that's kind of how we've traditionally done this and kept the funding. You know, one of my goals as the person on the subcommittee who has to support arts funding has been to get ourselves at the NEA or NEH to $1 per person. So, you know, we're up at 340 million people, and, you know, there's a lot of people in this country. Right now they're capped at 207 million. Now, that's just a pittance, really, when you think about the whole federal budget and how little that is. It's incredibly well-used money for everyone who knows who's benefited from it. And in my time as the ranking member on Interior Appropriations, which you heard is my job, that's where we fund NEA and NEH. I've been able to get some, you know, fairly substantial increases in that funding, but it's kind of embarrassing to say, you know, what does 10 or 20% of that little bit amount of money mean? But we have been able to do that. In the first Trump administration, they gave us a budget. In Congress, we say the president proposes, Congress disposes. So the Trump administration for those 4 years gave us a budget with their suggested funding levels for everything Congress funds. NEA and NEH got zero. So for those 4 years, they said, we don't need these agencies, we're just going to give them zero. To the credit of my Republican colleagues on the other side of the aisle and my Democratic colleagues who with me were fighting, we got it to, and have kept it at 207 million. So we beat back a big fight there. That was the first zeroing out of these funds. We beat them all back. And we did that using the exact kind of tactics I'm talking about, going back to people. The co-chair of my subcommittee on appropriations, interior and environment, Mike Simpson of Idaho, is a wonderful Republican who still likes to read books, who still likes going to his community theater, who actually understands what we're talking about in these things. And he, too, has been, I mean, I wouldn't have gotten there without a Republican on the other side who was there with me. So, all good. The current co-chair of the Arts Caucus, Mike Turner of Dayton, Ohio, has been very involved in the arts when he was the mayor of Dayton, Ohio. Totally understands why we need to do this. So that's where we are. We don't know what this year's budget will be, but we're in a whole different era. And do you want me to start talking about the whole different era? Do you want to ask another question in between?
Well, no, I
don't want to just give a lecture here.
I'm very comfortable.
I'm not even a college professor.
It's actually relaxing for me not to be giving the lecture, so I love that. But actually, first I was going to say, can we just go back to our regular background slide? Because it's a little depressing to have this behind it. Exactly. No, I would love to hear, because you know, I don't think anyone in the country is unaware that the second Trump administration has started out extremely differently than the first one. And so I think a lot of us are wondering, what are the strategies? What are the conversations you and your colleagues are having?
Okay, so, all right, so now we're going to start talking about this current era under the background of, I mean, we knew a lot about what happened in the first Trump administration. I was there, and we won. We won on these kinds of topics. We also fund the Smithsonian and the National Gallery. Managed to get through all that, maybe some spending cuts here and there, but certainly no ideological or policy incursion into what happened in those places. So first, I just need to give just a little explanation, the civic side of this, about Congress. So, Article 1 of the Constitution sets out the separation of powers. This is where I fail horribly as an academic. But I think we hear a lot about that now. And it's very clear, the delineation of the duties between the Senate, the House, the President, and the judiciary. The thing that you hear people talking about all the time right now is this: Congress has the power of the purse. So it's set out very clearly in the Constitution that the House proposes a budget, the Senate works with us on it, we present it to the President, he can veto it, he can go along with it, he or she, and then it's the executive branch's department to spend the money that Congress allocated. So what we're fighting about every single day now, and what you see fighting about in the courts, is that we believe it's unconstitutional and illegal for the president to then choose, pick and choose about what to spend, particularly to do so just based on an ideological view, personal preference, a grudge, whatever it is. And that's why there are probably 80 lawsuits going on right now. Each one of them, it might be about, reducing employees or, something else, blocking funding, eliminating USAID. All these things go back to this question of who controls this, who gets to spend the money, and who gets to make these decisions. And that is so fundamental to what we're dealing with right now. It's just important to understand why we think we're in a constitutional battle. We think we're in a crisis like we haven't seen before, at least since the Civil War or whenever. So all these tactics that I talked about, convincing my colleagues, getting sufficient votes, putting together a budget with enough support, aren't in play right now because the president isn't using the normal channels and the powers of Congress to make these kinds of decisions. You kind of just have to look at the Kennedy Center drama to get a little bit of a sense of what we're dealing with. So for whatever reason, the president didn't like the Kennedy Center or felt I don't want to overly try to determine psychologically what he was feeling, but he never attended a Kennedy Center honors. He never attended anything at the Kennedy Center. Some performers said they wouldn't go to the White House during that time. So perhaps he just felt like not included. And we're also dealing with this overlay of ideological arguments being placed on conditions for arts and arts funding. So, the president fired the board of the Kennedy Center, those that he had the discretion to fire, put in people who were close to him or that he knew, including Lee Greenwald from Proud to Be an American, which he played at every rally he did, had them appoint him the president and said, we'll now have the golden age of arts and culture, and I will determine who performs here. It's kind of mind-boggling, given all the sort of history of how arts organizations usually work and how this was fundamentally, operating. No one is... so Congress gives about 16% of the funding to the Kennedy Center. That maintenance of buildings, overall sort of upkeep of the environment there. The rest comes from the gate or from private donors. So, it's a multi-theater art center with lots of performances going on, highly well-attended, and with a board chair, David Rubenstein, who traditionally gave a lot of money and supported others who gave a lot of money. So that whole structure is gone, and there's a lot of confusion about how it will operate. In the future, there's already been about 50% drop in ticket sales. Some artists have been banned. Some artists have decided not to come. But it all goes back to this sort of notion of the president saying, I'm in charge, I will decide, and it will operate under a kind of point of view that I have, which isn't always clear to all of us what it's going to be. What will be allowed, what won't be allowed, what will be the golden age of America, who will be performing there. Steve Bannon suggested the January 6th choir of people should be there to perform. So who knows? Now, I don't want to get sort of too off the track here on this, but I think it's relevant to us trying to figure out, so what's going to happen to the NEA? They've already changed some of the grants. There are new standards. They're supposed to operate under the executive orders. You know, no drag performers, no anti-American propaganda, no DEI. I mean, the arts are so much about equity and inclusion and making sure underserved communities get what they need. Who's included in that? How will it impact the grants going forward? So, and will the president still expect full funding from my committee on the Kennedy Center, or will he expect full funding on the National Endowment for the Arts, just that he will get to decide how the money is spent? I don't want to sound like I'm, in a political propaganda kind of talk, but it's a very different era, and we're all kind of racking our brains saying, what does this actually mean? In a variety of areas of government, we're fighting back to say, this isn't DEI. This isn't an anti-American propaganda. But we don't really know yet how we will fight this and what it will be. And will it be a funding battle, or will it be an ideological battle? And then how are we going to arm up to fight it? And just, so many of you have been on the front lines of these questions before. What's equity? What's inclusion? Who's underserved? But these are harder arguments to win than just kind of, well, maybe not, but what's decency? I don't know. It's very complicated. And particularly we're focusing on the arts, but we do the NEA and NEH. We're here with an NEH supported grant. What is anti-American propaganda? You dig into it and people, I've listened to a lot of conversations people have been having, this idea that you can say slavery happened, but you're not allowed to say we're a racist nation, or you can't talk about the long-term impacts. It was just a mistake we made once that we fixed now. It's sort of mind-boggling, and we need all of our smartest cultural thinkers and historians to be in this with us, because we're fighting a very different battle.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most, especially thinking as a historian, right, one of the most perplexing things is this, how do you have an argument with someone who's an ideologue? Right? Someone for whom maybe evidence doesn't matter or data doesn't matter. Like, I looked up just for our conversation, what is the data on arts economically? And just, this is very broad overview, but the arts actually recently have been in an upswing, and they will contribute well over $1 trillion to the current economy. Adjusted for inflation in 2022, it increased 4.8%. By comparison, the broader economy, the GDP, gross domestic product, only increased 1.9%. So you could say that the smart economic argument, right, is invest in the arts because it brings home the bacon, or turkey bacon or tofu bacon, whatever people want to eat, or closer to home, right, in Texas. The taxable revenue from the core arts and culture industry has grown 63% since 2010. That's a huge amount. And so the arts and culture industry generated $7.3 billion in taxable sales for the Texas economy, totaling $459.1 million in state sales tax revenue in 2023. So the Texas arts and culture economic activity generated $7.3 billion for the Texas economy and $69.7 for the GDP, and that was the 2025 State of the Arts report from the Texas Commission on the Arts. So it used to be that economic argument was our home run every time, because it used to be, I'm a child of the Cold War. I certainly remember the days when for a Republican Party, business, the economy, that was their hard stop. So if you could bring them things in economic terms, you could often find a way to work together. This does not seem to be the case. Those of us here and online in higher education have had a pretty harrowing few weeks as they've also gone after STEM funding through various federal agencies, funding that I think no one ever imagined would ever be under threat. And I am very, very fortunate, especially as Secretary of the General Faculty, to have been working with extraordinary colleagues in STEM. But when that happened, I thought, oh, welcome to our world, right? Welcome to the world of the arts and humanities, where everything is precarious and fragile all the time, and where you're constantly working in an atmosphere of having to justify yourself over and over and over again. So if we don't have economics, what do we, like, have you had some preliminary conversations with Republican colleagues? Have they asked, are there questions being asked that might help us see our way?
I think that many of my Republican colleagues are every bit as baffled as I am about how to deal with this. I mean, remember, go back to my first sort of point here is that we are used to a somewhat contentious system, but a predictable system of how government operates. President gives us his budget. We fight back. And Republicans and Democrats fight back equally in both administrations because we have things we want to fund. We don't like what they fund. So for my colleagues on the Republican side, who are also dealing with the pressure of if you speak up, there's a much greater price to pay than a Democrat speaking up right now. They mostly talk in hushed tones to the rest of us about what the hell, this is a clusterfuck. I mean, really, like, what do we do? And I don't think that...
That's the technical political term.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That was, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
As I tell my students, I'm from Brooklyn, so those are regular words for me.
Yeah, in Maine, that's just jargon. That's just, that's just the weather.
Yeah, we just want to translate the jargon.
Yes, thank you, yeah. But I mean, really, I talked to a few of them right away because the Kennedy Center announcement, I think, was so bracing. And again, that's just one piece of this, but it's like, that's just, we don't deal with things like that. We deal with, as you said, and sometimes even in the past, Republicans will say to me, give me the arguments I need to, I'm with you on this, but give me some arguments back home. And that's when the importance of, your local community weighing in, finding out about, the scholarship your next door neighbor got because of an incredible funding program for the arts, or, the kid who grew up and went to theater camp and now is on Broadway and you know him and what a great story of what happened in your town. So all those things have been our tools. But these are very confusing tools, and because it's so much based on rhetoric. I looked up, or I was reading someone's article about this. So DEI, those are just buzzwords. They get used all the time now in Congress, and they're just, we're not going to have DEI. We're not going to have trans. We're not going to have DEI. We're not going to have drag queens. So here are some DEI things that got funded. Ballet classes for children with disabilities in Maryland, prison theater in Missouri, Native American artists residency in North Dakota, free and reduced prices at a theater arts program, an arts program from Native American at a Native American nursing facility. So, all these things, and you're like, even Republicans who aren't, in the rhetoric business or beyond the rhetoric, don't exactly know what to do. And I think arts agencies, educational institutions don't know what to do about this. We also fund, under my subcommittee, we fund the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so all Native American funding goes through our committee. We just had 3 days worth of our public witness hearings where the chiefs and the chairs come before us and talk about the problems. And, we're always talking about Indian health and Indian education and Indian law enforcement. They're all underfunded. But this time, a lot of the conversation was all of the tribes who are going to portals to try to get their education grant or their EPA grant or something at the Treasury Department, and were blocked because it got caught up in DEI. And, the chiefs were saying to us, we're not DEI, we're not environmental justice. We're sovereign nations. But, there's no level of understanding of any of that in the DOGE, in the cuts that are being made right now, but then even further in this sort of ideological agenda that people ran on. They put these ads up on TV. Now they got to sort of deliver on it. And, as you said, arts and arts funding has been subject to this for a very long time, but it's another layer of complexity that's like, well, what does that even mean? And of course, we're very worried about all the institutions and organizations that are just going to say, I'm not even going to apply for funding anymore. I'm not even going to try because I'm going to proactively assume, or the educational institutions that are going to decide on all these criteria, like what could be a kid's student play this year in your local high school, like what's allowed in a curriculum, in a teaching of a class, what gets pulled out. But just the fear that's generated around this, I mean, talk about taking away creativity, inclusivity, all the things that we value the arts for. These things are insidiously going to go after all of that, and they're kind of unknowns. And I'm not sure my colleagues really know what there are either.
I want to go home. All right, I just have this quick question. It's really not arts specifically, but I've been wondering this. So in preparation for this visit, I was talking with your wonderful colleagues in your office who are amazing, and it's been such a pleasure working with your office. And they, one of them said this great thing to me of, nobody in Congress wants to get yelled at in the grocery store. And those are the kind of details I love, because it's like, that's how it really works. You know, if you go to get your groceries and you got someone yelling at you, you're not happy. I mean, that would be true for all of us, right? You don't have to get elected to Congress to not want to get yelled at in the grocery store. But just after we had that conversation, there was a string of articles about a bunch of Republican, both I think senators and representatives. It wasn't the grocery store, but it was at their town halls or in public getting yelled at. I know what I want the answer to be desperately, but do you think that something like that might shift the agenda or might change things possibly if folks who are supposed to be pressing this, the administration's agenda, are getting yelled at constantly, that there might be an opening there? Okay, like, please say yes. No, you don't have to say yes. I just really, really hope. So
Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes.
A real yes, or like, I feel sorry for you, Charlotte Canning.
No, absolutely yes. I mean, I just even know from our elevator conversations, you know, I came from Washington to be here. So just this past week, and, you know, talking to my colleagues, hearing my colleagues talking to each other in the elevator, saying, you know, that wasn't easy. That's not pleasant. It will probably drive a sort of shutdown of public town hall meetings, and, you know, just a little bit less engagement in the public. But it's true. I mean, most of us do go to the grocery store. We go to our kids' public performances or basketball games, or, you know, we're out there in public. We go home on the weekends. So it's pretty hard to avoid some public comment, whether you hold a big town meeting or not. Part of what's challenging about this administration is you might hear all those things, but there's a lot of retaliation for going against what the president wants. I mean, we had a big budget vote last week, Tuesday night, and, you know, members were getting phone calls from the president while we were on the floor, yelled at in the cloakroom, and changed their votes. That's how that, what's called the budget reconciliation bill, which is the next colossal cut coming down the pike, got passed. So there's a lot more pushback from this administration. But I think the level of anger that my colleagues saw out there in that, the fact that people showed up and said, this just isn't right, or justify this to me, was really important. And it's going to be very important to continue that, because we're just, you know, a few weeks into this, and a lot has already been done, and a lot more will happen.
All right, I feel a little better. So I want to shift now to focus really specifically on the NEA. And to create a transition and to do that, I want to share something with you. So last week, 2 weeks ago, Michael Dwatley and I went to the LBJ library and did some research into the papers on the founding of the NEA and the NEH that are held there. One interesting thing we found was that the administration did not film the ceremony of the signing of the bill that created these two endowments. And apparently it was filmed by local news agencies, but we can't seem to find that footage. So what we did find, though, was an audio recording of Johnson's remarks upon signing the bill, So we have that, and we were going to show you some of the images from that day while the recording is playing. I do want to warn you, and this comes from teaching undergraduates, President Johnson's cadence is a little soporific. So what I'm going to urge you to do is see this as some kind of Zen moment where by focusing on his voice, you travel back in time to September 1965, and you sort of get a sense of being present at that moment. And the pictures are all from that day as well. So if we could do that, that would be great.
And countless empires and nations have come and gone. Those which created no lasting works of arts are reduced today to short footnotes in history's catalog. Art is a nation's most precious heritage, for it is in our works of art that we reveal to ourselves and to others the inner vision which guides us as a nation. And where there is no vision, the people perish. We in America have not always been kind to the artists and the scholars who are the creators and the keepers of our vision. Somehow, the scientists always seem to get the penthouse, while the arts and the humanities get the basement. Last year, for the first time in our history, we passed legislation to start changing that situation. We created the National Council on the Arts. The talented and the distinguished members of that council have worked very hard. They have worked creatively. They have dreamed dreams, and they have developed ideas. This new bill, creating the National Foundation for the Arts and the Humanities, gives us the power to turn some of those dreams and ideas into reality. We would not have that bill but for the hard and the thorough and the dedicated work of some great legislators in both houses of the Congress. All lovers of art are especially indebted to Congressman Adam Clayton Powell of New York, to Congressman Frank Thompson of New Jersey, to Senator Lester Hill of Alabama, to Senator Claiborne Pell of Rhode Island, to many members of both House and Senate who stand with me on this platform today. Too many names to mention. But these men and women have worked long and hard and effectively to give us this bill. And now we have it. Let me tell you what we're going to do with it. Working together with the state and the local governments and with many private organizations in the arts, we will create a national theater to bring ancient and modern classics of the theater to audiences all over America. We will support a national opera company and a national ballet company. We will create an American Film Institute, bringing together leading artists of the film industry, outstanding educators, and young men and women who wish to pursue the 20th century art form as their life's work. We will commission new works of music by American composers. We'll support our symphony orchestras. We'll bring more great artists to our schools and universities by creating grants for their time in residence. Well, those are only a small part of the programs that we are ready to begin. They will have an unprecedented effect on the arts and the humanities of our great nation. But these actions, and others soon to follow, cannot alone achieve our goals. To produce true and lasting results, our states and our municipalities, our schools and our great private foundations must join forces with us. It is in the neighborhoods of each community that a nation's art is born. In countless American towns, there live thousands of obscure and unknown talents. And what this bill really does is to bring active support to this great national asset, to make fresher the winds of art in this great land of ours. The arts and the humanities belong to the people, for it is, after all, the people who create them.
So, first of all, the child is Maria Shriver. We thought that was, so we kept that in. And one of the people that Johnson was shaking hands with was the choreographer Agnes DeMille. So I have to get out of my historian head because I'm like, there's so much for us to unpack here, which is not our task today. But one of the things that struck me was how no one really knew exactly what the NEA and the NEH would do. If you were listening to the part where he was outlining all the things that would come from that bill, very few of those things actually happened. We don't have a national theater. I mean, the Kennedy Center in some ways serves that purpose, but that's not really what it is comparable to, say, some of European national theaters. We don't have a national ballet company. We don't have a national opera company. A lot of us would argue that's a good thing, in fact. But I was wondering, as I was listening to this over and over, maybe the fact that they didn't know what it was then might give us ideas of how to reinvent it now. But I want to put the really depressing, hard question to you, which is, if the NEA and the NEH went away, what in their absence would be the role that you think the federal government could play or contribute to an equitable arts infrastructure absent those two formal programs? Just a reminder, I know you all know this, but the NEH grant is what is making today possible. How would the government support the arts?
I guess I can't even go along with a discussion of what if they went away. I mean, you can always say, and we've had many discussions over time about, like, well, how should we revision this, and what's the best role? Is this too bureaucratic? Does the money get to the right people? Is this the way we should be going about doing it? But it's all we've had for all this time. And by the way, thank you for showing that, because I think there's something very heartwarming and moving about hearing Johnson's words, to know that 60 years later, it is still here. We have increased the funding. I don't know for inflation if we really got that much more money, but we've got more. And it has become somewhat entrenched in what we do in communities and states around the country. So, I have worked on bills, and we had the wonderful Chair Jackson here yesterday, and thank you for bringing her. And I was privileged to work with her, and she was very good about saying, how do we entrench the arts through other organizations? Is there, things that we can do through the EPA? And certainly the Department of Education plays a big role in the arts in terms of arts education, although that department may be eliminated, so that's another topic. We have worked on bills like there should be an arts component to everything. There's a public arts component to transportation. There's, things here and there. But I think if we give up on the NEA and NEH or our fundamental funding for the arts, beyond just restarting again when we're in a different administration or a different era, which we may involuntarily be forced to do, who knows. I I don't exactly know. There was some great conversation in yesterday's panels about the work being done in San Francisco. Thank you for that. Is that Hewitt that's doing the community-based arts funding, and they're using a CDC, a community development corporation, and seeing in arts as commerce in developing neighborhoods, and that's a very sort of grassroots approach and something we hear about a lot. How do you support individual artists? They need housing, they need healthcare. We need this community to be viable. So there's always the could we go at this in a different way? Could we go at this in a very community-based way? Could it be part of rural development? Could it be part of urban development? But each one of those ideas requires an administration open to use government funding for giving people health care. I mean, they've already cut, we're about to face some of the biggest cuts in Medicaid, our fundamental funding program that we've ever seen. They've already cut at HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is how we get low-income housing. So we're up against this fight on every front for every creative thing that we know to do. Now, certainly when you have a war on the arts, people rise up. People will start to say, what can I do? How can we fight in our own community? Donations will go up to arts organizations. Foundations will say we got to take on a bigger role. But that goes back to another fundamental fight we've been having in government. We're involved in an era that is back to that notion of shrinking government till it can fit in the bathtub, which was, somebody's Grover Norquist's, taxation line. We're about to have some of the biggest tax cuts we've ever seen, which will shrink the revenue, and then we're going to do all these cuts and staffing cuts, so agencies will be understaffed and won't be able to operate, and you'll just say, who needs the government? It doesn't work anymore. So this sort of vicious cycle that we're in. But I would say, I see a very different role for government. I see single-payer health care. I see affordable housing. I see college that doesn't leave students with debts. And I'm not, crazy and radical. That's how most of our other Western nations operate. That's how most countries see the role of government and what we should do. So, the arts is just one more piece of that, but we're about to lose a lot more at the same moment in time. And I guess my, sort of fundamental argument is I hate this idea that we always say, well, we'll take away food benefits for people, but there are soup kitchens and food pantries. Well, they can't meet the need, and that'll be true on healthcare. There aren't enough foundations to fund everybody's healthcare and medical research. There aren't enough foundations, and when we put all those other things on them to make sure we can have arts and culture. So I'm at a little bit of a loss, although I do like some of these other ideas of how you support artists and how you use some creative thinking. I love the sort of commerce and neighborhood notion of it and incorporate it all. And I'm sure we'll do more of that. But I don't think we should ever let government off the hook for playing a fundamental role. And not just the economic argument, but the, arts are, vital to our health and mental health. And they bring communities together, and they give us a way to talk about difficult things in the form of an arts presentation, a movie, a documentary, a play, a thoughtful piece. So, yeah.
No, I'm with you. One of my favorite quotations, my students all know this because I say it all the time in class, is the historian Michael Kamen wrote an article on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the signing of the NEA and the NEH, and he observed, and this is a quoting him, "The state has a long tradition of encouraging and supporting cultural activities when doing so seems to be in the interest of the state." So I'm wondering if it's also maybe about redefining those interests, right, of pointing out, like, here's how it benefits.
Well, so, we have taken that idea for a long time. In everything I've, just said about, remind the member, like, here's what this does to your rural state. Here's the opportunities your neighbor had because of this. But I think we're facing a very sinister interpretation of what you just said. Again, we're dealing with an administration that is modeling some of their practices after someone like Viktor Orban in Hungary, where you can go back and look at, when the press was cut off from, freedom of speech, when books were banned, when educational institutions had their curriculum redefined. And it's a way of using the arts in service of an agenda of that current administration. And that's what's dangerous here again, I think, when we're talking about the golden age of the arts at the Kennedy Center, but it's going to be very tightly defined about sort of a nationalist point of view of what's patriotic and what's religious and what we're all allowed to think. I have to say my own words sound absurd. I mean, I feel like I'm either in a science fiction novel or a movie that was so poorly written no one would ever go to watch it, okay? And I'm I'm a progressive member of Congress, but I'm actually very reasoned. I come from a common sense state. I live in a fishing community of lobster fishermen. I don't talk with a lot of sort of vitriol and we're going off the cliff. But, every single day I'm observing things, and sometimes they're just subtle things, about the mandates that are being sent to our schools, or the threat that teachers are under, or these sort of simplistic ideas of history can only be taught in such a way that it glorifies everything we've ever done in our country and never discusses, where we might have gone wrong, just so we don't repeat that again. A very random thought, the AP has been kicked out. The Associated Press, boring conventional media can't go to briefings anymore because they won't say Gulf of America, which, you guys are like academics. I don't think that's been changed yet. So facts and the truth, those things. Allegedly one of the underpinnings of the argument yesterday that the president had with Zelensky was that he wouldn't wear a suit. He wouldn't wear a suit to the office because Zelensky said, I'm not putting on a suit till the war is over. This is what I wear. But deciding what you can and can't wear to a White House meeting, these are things that are like, ooh, this is using the arts or our culture or these sort of strict rules in service of who you think the government should be and how we should all act. Like I said, that's a sci-fi movie, or bad sci-fi movie.
Yeah, a really bad one. So if those of us who were with us yesterday remember, we had a way of wrapping up, which was to ask our speakers to maybe manifest something about it. Maybe it's an aspiration or a hope for the future or a way forward. So I wonder if in our final moments you might think out loud a little bit about what you might want to manifest or aspire to, or what you'd like us to call on to help you manifest.
I would like to aspire to being in a different time. Another sci-fi time traveling. I never liked those things before, but now I'm like, oh, can you do that time travel thing?
I turned to my husband a few weeks ago and said, I don't like this timeline. Can we get another one?
Yeah. I will say, thinking back to the last 4 years when I didn't agree with the administration, I was heartened by a notion that we had a giant civics lesson going on in America. And of course, we hear from our constituents all the time. We now hear from them at an unprecedented rate, and thank you very much for everyone who does that. But I remember in that last era, people started calling us up and saying that they believed in NATO, or they wanted me to use a discharge petition, or, now they're talking about the power of the purse and the separation of powers. And so, I think it's a very healthy thing in a country that can occasionally be apathetic or, fall into worrying about things that don't matter, to be saying okay, what are the fundamentals of democracy? What's a constitutional crisis? And why would you even ever say that? So I deeply appreciate the fact that as humans, many, many people and increasing numbers of people are stepping up and saying, what does this mean for me? What does it mean for the future of my democracy? What does it mean if we have an administration that for 4 years ignores climate change? Will my children and grandchildren have a future? And what's my role to play in all of that? So if I was going to manifest, which I do think is an academic word that we never use in politics, and I've had to think about, what does manifest even mean? But I like it. I would say that, while there were a lot of people after this election who just said, okay, that's it. I'm just grumpy and I'm sad and I'm going to turn off paying attention to anything and I'm going to take up knitting. And while I'm all in favor of knitting, embroidery, sewing your own clothes, I run the slow fashion caucus. I'm all about, visible mending, whatever you want to do. Those are important things to be doing at the same time while you say, I'm a citizen. I have a responsibility to my friends and neighbors and to people who are being hurt by this, to federal employees who are losing their jobs, to kids who are going to be marginalized in their schools, to teachers who are being, assaulted at a rate that we've never thought about before in terms of assaulting what they are allowed to talk about and teach, and the great uncertainty out there. And even, our corporate leaders who need to get a spine and need to hear from all of us that we want them to stand up for the things that are fundamental, like the safety of our country and having an FAA that operates, and, just go down the list of things. And I think when it comes to the arts that, I feel the saddest in many ways about this, because you're already all warriors all the time in representing people and underserved ideas and bringing out creativity, whether it's popular or not, and saying the difficult things that don't always get said. I mean, it's just so vitally important. And I think if I was running an arts organization right now, I'd say, well, screw it. I'm not going to go after this funding. I'm not going to do this stuff anymore. We're going to operate on a shoestring, or we're going to shut down our doors. And, we just need you now more than ever. It's not even a question. And we're fighting back against something that, I barely understand, this deep ideological assault, and this idea of creativity and what you're allowed to say and how do you actually get to be yourself and all those things. So I guess I would just manifest take the weekend off, but don't give it up, because we may lose these agencies. We may have to really fight hard for them, but these are worthy fights, and they're way more fundamental to democracy than we often give them credit for. Because I know one of the things you said in the beginning is it's hard to stand up as an elected leader and say, I'm fighting for the arts, and people are like, why aren't you fighting for my health care and my housing? But it's like, this is fundamental too, and so many of you know it so much better than the rest of us. So you actually know exactly what we're fighting for, and you've got the stories, to back that up, and your stories are the most valuable things we have right now. So that's what I think.
That's amazing. So, although I'm sure, I often tell my students when we have our final class in the week, this weekend, do something fun, waste some time, always have time to relax. She meant after the end of today, take some time, because we are coming back. So before I hand it off to my colleague for what we've been calling our outros, you have an intro and we've coined outro. Before I do that, could you please join me one more time? It is extraordinary to have Representative Pingree come all the way down here to Texas and to join us and spend, if you think about what's going on in Congress, she was here all day yesterday. She's here today. That's an amazing, amazing support for the arts in time and resources, which are often the things we have the littlest of. So I am deeply grateful you're here today. And if you would all join me in thanking her yet again.
Just echoing that gratitude and us standing up for everything you stand up for every day. I mean, for fighting for us and for fighting. And I think we're fighters. So we give each other energy and we give each other love. And there's just so much respect I have, and I think we all have, for this fight that you're fighting. And if it gives you energy to know that we're behind every step, do those steps, take those steps, and maybe we'll come marching in there to your office and chest bump you every now and then and just say, come on now, let's do this. We're so happy that you're a part of our network and this sort of social infrastructure. So just to transition out, we're gonna take a break here for the folks joining us live on the live stream. We'll be back for a 1 o'clock session and start the afternoon sessions here, 1 o'clock Central, 2 o'clock Mountain Time. I don't know, I'm on the East Coast. So 12 o'clock, yeah, I'm not good with math. I mean, we're in the humanities. So thank you so much for tuning into this super important conversation. So much good information about the how of legislative process and why it's so dizzying and disorienting. Because we can always say, wow, this really stinks, but we don't understand how and how it's put together. And I think that's invaluable information for everybody here. So those of us in Austin, we can take a break, and we'll be starting lunch at around 11:30 in the lobby, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of buzz and conversation. So one more time, please join me in thanking Representative Pingree and Dr. Canning for all of their wisdom and passion and for standing up. We will return at 1 p.m. for our session on labor and work, which I'm so honored to be facilitating. Thank you.